There are RTX 4090s and there are RTX 4090s. In fact, I have tested 5 different RTX 4090s at 5 different price points, different brands. The question is, which one should you buy? Is there a difference or is there not a difference? But there is a difference. Who's the sponsor of this video?
Looking for a cheap way to license your Windows? Check out Whokeys through the links in the video description. Make sure to use the code TN20 to get a 30% off. Paste the license to the activation settings and you're all done. This license is for Windows 10, but you can upgrade it to Windows 11 for free. They also offer Microsoft Office 19 license. Use the same code TN20 to get a 30% off. Check out whokeys.com in the video description below.
So here's 5 different 4090s that I have tested. The Gaming X Trio 4090 from MSI, the Gigabyte 4090 Gaming OC. By the way, this is slightly more expensive than the Gaming X from MSI. Then the more expensive one, Zotac Amp Extreme Aero RTX 4090. Then the more expensive Asus TUF 4090 OC, which is, as you can see, even more expensive. And then finally, the most expensive in this bunch, the MSI Supreme X 4090. First of all, looking at the pricing of these GPUs, I've lined them up from cheapest to the most expensive, and that's how we're going to be comparing them as well. The Gaming X at the time of me making this video is the cheapest one. If you want to check out the latest pricing, I highly recommend checking out the links in the description below. You might get a more premium 4090 for less by the time you're watching this. So the Gaming X has the cheapest price, but the core clock speeds advertised is 2610 maximum. The more expensive Gigabyte Gaming OC is about 1.62% more expensive, but has a bit of a lower clock speed, maximum clock speed 2535 megahertz. Then the more expensive Zotac Amp Extreme Aero is 2.2% more expensive, so there's about $35 more expensive now, but is 1.5% slower in the clock speeds, 2580. The Asus TUF has 2595 MHz clock speeds and is 2.8% more expensive, about $85 to $90 more expensive now. And then the more expensive Supreme X, which is $146 more expensive, 8.53% more expensive, has the highest advertised maximum clock speed of 2.64 gigahertz, 2640 megahertz. So let's see if these clock speeds actually make a difference in real applications. I'm gonna leave my test setup bench in the description below, but all the hardware is exactly the same, all the software is exactly the same level, but there's one thing, there is a few different drivers that I'm trying all these different GPUs. So I've started to have these GPUs in from about October 2022 when the 4090 was launched, and then slowly I've had like them over till now in March. So there's been a few driver updates which also shows us if there is a lower or higher end GPU, does the driver, update or driver make a difference there as well? So we'll see some interesting results there, but just so you know, there are a little bit of a different drivers, and I always use the studio driver, not a gaming driver, studio driver, which I think creators should be using. First of all, Geekbench 5 GPUs, so just generally seeing where do they line up. The Gigabyte Gaming OC is 1.8% faster in the OpenCL score and about 2 to 4% slower in the CUDA and Vulkan score. Here's the thing, I'm not just doing the benchmark once and these results are just like one single test result. I've done an average of about 8 to 10 benchmarks and then put the average of these benchmarks, and there we get like each benchmark for each GPU. So they're very accurate in terms of like the average of the benchmarks. Looking at the Zotac Extreme Aero, we're about 1% faster in the OpenCL score, but 2 to 4% slower in the CUDA and Vulkan scores. The Asus TUF is now 2.2% slower in the OpenCL score, 2.4% slower in the CUDA score, and about the same in Vulkan score. Interesting, the Asus TUF has the oldest driver in the bunch here. That's the actual media driver that NVIDIA has released for the reviews, so that has the lowest drivers. So when we see a little bit of lower scores, we can know that probably a newer driver will get it slightly bit faster, but just a comment here. The MSI Supreme X has got a public driver there, but this is one of the earlier drivers as well. Public, one of the first studio drivers released beginning of October, is 0.6% faster in the OpenCL, about 2.5% slower in the CUDA score, and 4% faster in the Vulkan scores. So in Geekbench, they kind of look a bit the same. The Vulkan score is the one that fluctuates the most, but that's usually what happens with the NVIDIA cards and Vulkan scores. You can get a little bit of different scores there. The cheapest to the most expensive in terms of CUDA score is about 2.5%. And I'd say about 2% is within the margin of error, and above that, we'll kind of start to maybe see a little bit of a measurable difference, but not a difference that you would feel in the real world. In Photoshop, you can see that the gaming OC is about 2.6% maximum slower in the general score. Overall score 1.8% slower. Zotac is pretty much the same as the Gaming X. Within 1% of the MSI Gaming X. Asus TUF OC is about the same, within 1% of the Gaming X, and Supreme X again the same. So in Photoshop, we're literally seeing like up to 2% difference in some kind of scenario, but it can be the cheaper or more expensive card. You don't really see a difference at all. The difference is not noticeable. In Premiere Pro, where the workflow is a bit more GPU heavy compared to the Photoshop, we can see that the Gaming OC is within 1% of Gaming X from MSI. Zotac is between 1 to 2% slower than the Gaming X. Asus TUF is 0.5%, something like that, averages more faster than the MSI Gaming X. And then the Supreme X is actually slightly slower, interestingly, than the Gaming X. But here again, we have a bit of a newer driver in the Gaming X and a bit of an older driver on the Supreme X, which just to me shows there is literally no difference at all. You're not going to be able to notice the difference in Premiere Pro, where we're still kind of a 60% CPU and 40% GPU maybe workload, something like that. We're not going to notice the difference. In After Effects, the Gigabyte Gaming OC has the newest driver here. It's about 0.5% faster than the Gaming X from MSI. The Zotac is about 1.5% slower than the Gaming X from MSI. Asus TUF is about 2.3% slower. So we can see that the drivers actually have gone a little bit forward, because in all of the specs, the Asus TUF OC has higher clock speeds than the Gaming X, but at the moment here about 2.2% slower. MSI Supreme X about 1% slower compared to the Gaming X there as well. As you can see, even in After Effects, there is less than 3% difference between the most expensive and the least expensive RTX 4090. I'd say there's no difference. Moving on to Davinci Resolve, which now is actually a bit more GPU heavy and utilizes GPU much more than the previous softwares we've tested so far. And here we're going to see some very interesting results. The Gaming OC here has the newest driver, okay? All the software is exactly the same, just the driver age kind of varies here. All of them are using the studio driver as well. The Gaming OC is about 10% slower than the MSI Gaming X. And for some reason, the Gaming X performs absolutely amazingly in this program. You can see the same Asus TUF here, which has the oldest driver, is about 10% slower, which is just, I don't know what's going on here. Even though if you compare the Asus TUF OC and the Gigabyte Gaming OC, they're pretty much performing within 0.5% or something like that. And they're both about 10% slower than the Gaming X. The Zotac Extreme Aero Down is about 4% slower than the Gaming X. And then the Supreme X is about 1.4% slower than the Gaming X. So interestingly, the MSI cards perform the best in here in the Davinci Resolve. And then Asus and Gigabyte cards, which are miles lower there. Now, I'm not sure what's going on in here. Again, this is an average of at least 7 tests, sometimes 10 or something like that. And then I'm replacing the most off benchmarks with some of the more accurate benchmarks, so that there's not that much variance between the best and the lowest score. But the average is 10% slower. That's just insane. So I'm not sure if this is the actual card difference, the manufacturing difference, how they manage the power, but there's some interesting results here. For some reason, the MSI cards like Davinci Resolve more. I don't know why. Moving on to V-Ray, this is purely GPU 3D rendering performance here now. and we really put the GPU to the test, and we're 100% utilizing the GPU. There is no CPU involved in this task. Only all load is on GPU, 100% maxed out, and seeing the score here. The gaming OC is pretty much the same in CUDA scores, but about 4.5% slower in the RTX scores, which is kind of a measurable amount here now. The Zotac Extreme Aero is about 0.3 slower in CUDA scores and about 1% slower in the RTX scores, which means basically the same. Asus TUF is the same, slightly faster, 0.5% in RTX scores and 1.3% faster in the CUDA scores. Again, no difference there. And finally, the most expensive MSI Supreme X is within 1% of the Gaming X, so not that big of a difference. The biggest difference was on the Gaming OC and the RTX. Now Blender, another 3D rendering program, and here we see some interesting results. The Gigabyte Gaming OC is about 3% faster in the monster scene, 7% faster in the junk shop and classroom scenes than the MSI Gaming X. Now the Gaming OC has the newest driver in the bunch here, which just shows that in Blender, the newer driver will give you a little bit more performance than the earlier versions of the studio drivers, because as you can see, it's up to 7% faster than the Zotac Extreme Aero and Asus TUF OC, and about 4 to 6% faster than the MSI Supreme X, which I honestly think is due to the driver update, because on the specs, Gigabyte has got also one of the lowest clock speeds there. So if you're using the Blender, have a look if there is a new studio driver available for your 4090 or for your GPU. You might get a bit more performance out there. And last of all, Octanebench. Again, GPU workflowed, 100% GPU. CPU doesn't do anything in there pretty much. And the difference is not that big. The newest driver with the Gigabyte Gaming OC were about 2.7% faster than the Gaming X. The Zotac is 0.5% faster than the Gaming X, and the TUF is about 0.5, again, pretty much the same as Gaming X and Zotac. And then the Supreme X is about 3.2% faster than the MSI Gaming X, which just is interesting because the Supreme has one of the earliest drivers, but that shows that in Octanebench, the higher end GPU here actually is slightly faster even with an older driver. I bet if we got a newer driver in there, we might see even more difference between the Gaming X, because the Gaming X has about 4-5 months newer driver than the Supreme X. So in conclusion, what's the point that I'm trying to make? If you are looking for the GPU as a creator, you don't really need to worry about which model of the GPU should we be going for. Just pick the one that has the price you'd like or the design you like. There is really no difference in performance between different models of RTX 4090. Like the 2-3% that we're seeing here, it's not really what you're going to see in real life. You see much bigger difference in between 4080 and 4090, obviously. So the extra $140 that you can save between the Supreme X, for example, compared to the Gaming X, really isn't worth it. And I'd recommend you go with the Gaming X. But sometimes you get a deal on the higher end ones, or if you want that type of design of the Supreme X, then you're paying for the design but not for the performance. And I'd argue this is exactly the same on different models of the GPUs. If we're talking about 4080s, 4070 Ti's, 4060s, 3090s, whatever GPU series, if you just look at the different models, the performance will be roughly within the same ballpark of 5% maximum, and you're not going to notice a difference between those cards. But what I'd recommend you to do is, if you're looking for a GPU that is perhaps in the less well-known brands out there, maybe that isn't mentioned in here, and you're looking for it and thinking, oh, that's quite a bit cheaper, maybe something like from PNY, and you're thinking, oh, this looks like good, just Google that card and then have a look at some of the reviews. If there is a lot of red alerts or saying, oh, these cards fry up, or these cards are pants, or these cards are doing this and that, then perhaps avoid it. But I'd say, honestly, if you don't find anything massive on the internet and you get it from a shop where you have pretty decent warranty and returns, it doesn't matter which 4090 you go for. Just pick the one that you like the most. If you like any of these cards, check them out in the description below. I'll link them down there. But if you're a creator and you want to build yourself a PC that's the best for your budget, check out the PC build guide in the description below. There's Create a PC build guide in there. Pick the one that's closest to your budget, configure the parts, and you can get the best bang for buck performance for your creator needs. Check them out in the description below. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.